You're blinded now, can't see the fight. Smoke and mirrors, they lead the way. Fooling hearts night after day. Welcome to the show, it's all pretend. The smiles, the lies, the perfect end. They run the flow. You clap on cue down in the front row. Painted faces, masks of stone. A hollow laugh that chills the bone. Puppets dangle strings unseen. Trick a cruel machine. Do you see it? Do you feel it? Or just believe it? Welcome to the show, it's all pretend. The smiles, the lies, the perfect end. The stage, they run the flow. You clap on cue down in the front row.
Welcome back. Another episode of Breaking the System. So we've been talking about morals and morality lately. And so let's start with a story. Okay? It's always a good story. Stories are good. Here we go. Let's picture a house. There's no yelling. There's no chaos. There's no dramatic collapse. There's just absence. A chair at the dinner table that slowly stops being set. A bike in the garage that no one teaches the kid to fix. A mother who gets stronger because she has to. And a boy who gets quieter because he doesn't know how to ask. And a girl who learns early that love is unpredictable. Nothing explodes, nothing trends, nothing makes headlines, and yet something foundationally shifts. Civilizations rarely collapse in fire, they erode in silence. And sometimes that, or what erodes first, is the family. So tonight we're not asking whether America has problems. We're asking something far more precise. Did the family fracture because of malicious design? Or because of structural drift no one had the courage to stop? And if it drifted, why did it drift in one direction for 60 straight years? Okay, those are all good questions to ask. Now we go to the numbers, because statistics don't lie. So let's talk about the statistical earthquake. So let's establish a baseline. Let's go back to 1960s America. 5% of births nationwide were to unmarried mothers. Not bad, 5%. Roughly 95% of children were born into two-parent households. Divorce rate was about 9 per 1,000 married women. And the median age of first marriage, for women it was 20, and for men it was the age of 23. That's pretty young. It's pretty young. And those are some really, really good numbers. Like if I'm trying to build a society and to keep birth rate at like a constant, which, you know, a nice steady growth where I'm not growing too much, like that's really, really good. Those numbers are awesome. So let's jump 80 years to 2020. Okay. Also looking at in America. Over 40% of births are to unmarried mothers. Divorce rate peaked in the 1980s and remains historically elevated. The median age of first marriage now is between 28 and 30 for women and between 30 and 32 for men. So we're adding 10 years. That's quite a bit. And nearly 1 in 4 children live in single-parent households. That alone is a generational transformation. Okay, those numbers are horrible. Like, we got really decent numbers in the 1960s. In the 1920s, those numbers are just what I would call, for civilization, for a society, that's catastrophic. When we're talking about longevity, those numbers are catastrophic. So let's zoom into Black America. Let's go into detail here, a little bit of data. In the 1960s, approximately 72 to 75% of black children were born to married parents. Black marriage rates were lower than white rates, but majority two-parent households still existed. 5 years later, in 1965, 25% of black births were outside of marriage, and the Moynihan report warned of structural instability. So this instability is starting in 1965. And by 1980, over 50% of black births were outside of marriage. So just in that 15 year, between 65 and 80, we increased 25% of black births happening outside of marriage. And by 1995, that increased again to around 65%. And today, we're looking roughly between 70 and 75% of black births occur outside of a marriage. And that means in 2 generations, the black family structure reversed from majority two-parent to majority single-parent at birth. Now, if we layer in incarceration, okay, and this is massive as well, from 1970 to 2000, so we're looking at a range of 30 years, U.S. prison population grew from around 200,000 to well over 1 million. Today it exceeds well over 2 million. Black men face incarceration rates approximately 5 to 6 times higher than white men, and nearly 1 in 3 black men born in the late 20th century will experience incarceration at some point. That's huge. Those numbers are huge. Catastrophic. Right? And not just within the black community. When we're looking at within the culture, within a civilization, within a nation, those numbers are catastrophic. That's devastating. Okay? So now let's layer in economics as well. So we're going to layer in this as well. Between 1970 and 1990, the U.S. lost millions of manufacturing jobs. Remember, we started to outsource those to Canada, Mexico, overseas, like Singapore, Indonesia, China, different places. Urban industrial employment collapsed, especially around your big cities like Detroit, right? We moved all of those car manufacturing jobs outside of the United States. And real wages for non-college men stagnated or declined. And part of the reason was because we had this huge push to get kids into college. And because of that, we demonized jobs within the job market, from like plumbing, electrical, welding, the hands-on jobs, right? So those real wage jobs for non-college men, they stagnated or they declined, depending on where you lived, okay? So marriage is strongly correlated with economic stability. So they kind of go hand in hand. When male wages decline, marriage rates decline. And that's not ideology, that's empirical. Okay? Those statistics don't lie, numbers don't lie. So now let's jump into welfare and housing incentives, because the incentives that the government is giving to people, that plays into it as well. Okay? So before the 1996 reform, the AFDC eligibility rules were this: provided increased benefits to households without an employed adult male, reduced or eliminated benefits if household income rose via marriage or cohabitation, created what economics later described as a marriage penalty within low-income structures. And public housing policies often restricted male residency. They evaluated benefits based on total household income, and they reduced assistance if an employed father was present. Again, there's no secret villain, but the incentives shaped the behavior. And the incentives were that if there was a male in the house, you were going to be penalized on those things. So because of that incentive of the government stepping in and providing or helping to provide those things to people that needed those support systems, right? It helped in facilitating to push the father or a male role model out of the house completely. Okay? And so when policy makes marriage financially fragile, marriage declines, especially under economic stress, right? Lots of marriage fail because of money, because of monetary policies that's been put into place, okay? So because of those things, fatherlessness outcomes, they're starting to rise. So children raised without fathers are statistically more likely to experience poverty. We're talking 4 times more likely. The dropout of high school. So children raised without fathers are statistically more likely to drop out of high school. They're more likely to experience teen pregnancy. They're more likely to encounter incarceration and at an early age. And they're more likely to exhibit behavioral and emotional regulation challenges. Like they have a huge time or a huge problem in handling and regulating emotions. Do we see a correlation with what is happening within the United States right now with people not being able to regulate and handle their behavior and their emotions? If they could, we would actually be able to sit down at the table and have a conversation about 2 people that don't agree, whether if it's religion, politics, whatever. But for a lot of people, that reality is non-existent right now. There's a lot of people, because they can't handle their behavior and because they can't handle their emotion, a lot of times behavior and emotion are intertwined with one another, that happens. Okay? And so about 85% of youth in prison come from father-absent homes. And that's pretty sad. That's extremely sad. And about 70% of juveniles in state institutions grew up without consistent paternal presence, which means that the mom might be consistent or the dad might be consistent, not putting so much pressure on the male, but that's who we're focusing on tonight is the male within the home, is that it's like a revolving door. One man steps out, another man steps in. That man steps out, another man steps in. So there's no consistent paternal presence within the home. And that's huge, especially for juveniles. And it's not racial, right? It's not saying that it affects any race more than another. It's structural across the board. But when one community reaches 70% plus single parent birth rates, that scale becomes civilizationalized. Okay? And so when we're looking at juveniles, when we're looking at youth, when we're 70 to 85%, and some years those numbers are increased, like, we have to look what is going on within civilization itself, within the United States. Like, are the things that we're doing, the laws and the structure that we're putting into the civilization, is it hindering growth or is it helping growth? And for the last 80 years, it has hindered growth. Where if you look at the numbers within the birth rates, we're actually at a decline, right? We're actually declining within our birth rate within the United States, and we have been for a while, which is why we need legal immigration, not illegal, right? We need people coming across legally, because if we don't have that, the population of the United States dwindles out and we die off. So let's look at some other places. Let's look international. First, let's go to Scandinavia. 50 to 60% out of wedlock births. Extremely high state support. So the state institutions are supporting those types of homes. Cohabitation normalized over marriage. So people just living together, but marriage is not really important. That's becoming normalized now. So marriage is kind of on its way out in Scandinavia. And the state absorbs paternal economic functions. So instead of the household absorbing those things, the state has to pay for it. But where does that money come from? It comes from taxes. Okay. So the more that those people rely on those institutions, the more that they have to raise taxes to combat that. Let's jump to Japan. Birth rate is below replacement. Japan is in, like we're talking about birth rate, Japan is in massive trouble. They have a 1.3 fertility rate. And for economic growth to happen within the fraternity or fraternal rate, you have to have like a 2.1 or a 2.2. Because think about it, you have the mother and the father, okay? So you have to have more than 2 kids to grow the population. Because if you just have 2 kids, you're just replacing the mother and father, okay? So Japan is actually at a 1.3 fertility rate, and statistically, most civilizations that reach, I think it's like a 1.5 or a 1.6, they don't ever come back. Statistically, throughout history, those civilizations have eventually died off. So Japan is in massive trouble right now. Part of that is because they delay marriage. There's economic pressure that discourages family formation, and the demographic contraction is accelerating massively because in Japan they put such an emphasis on the father working long hours, like anywhere from 10, 12, 14 hours a day every day, that there's not much cohabitation that takes place. The woman stays home, takes care of the house. Sometimes they have a job on their own, but the man, they put a lot of pressure on the man in that relationship in working long hours to make sure that everything is provided for within that economic structure. And that is causing the marriage delays, and that is causing or discouraging family to form within Japan. If we look at sub-Saharan Africa, historically, they have strong kinship networks, but urbanization is weakening the extended family buffer systems. Okay. We look at late Rome, they had declining fertility among its citizens. They expanded the grain doles because of the bread and circus, right? They wanted to keep people fed and to keep people entertained. And civic virtue starts to decline in the later Roman period. Okay, and all of those things have a correlation with each other. And that is when family weakens, the state expands, not out of evil, but out of necessity. Okay? But is that necessity in the long period worthwhile? Not saying that it's not evil, but the longer that we use those state expanded policies out of necessity, does society get lazy within itself, right? I'm not saying that people are lazy, but does society itself get lazy in not trying to correct those things that's happening within the structure of the family? So let's look at a philosophical deepening. Before law, there's love. And before policy, there's presence. The family is the first moral universe, right? We're talking about morals again. Family is the first moral universe. Even Aristotle argued that virtue is formed through habit, not through legislation. Habits are learned relationally, right? All of your habits not all of them, but the majority of your habits, especially early on at an early age, the habits that you learn, you get them from the people you're related to, the people that you spend time with. So authority, mercy, discipline, forgiveness, these are first embodied where? In the home. Institutions regulate, and families they form. That distinction determines whether a society produces compliance or it produces character. Okay? Also think about what society is trying to produce today. Does society want people that complies, or do they want people that have individualized character in building something new? Right? Building something new. Not necessarily for today, but for tomorrow. Okay? Let's add in the theological layer. Across traditions, family is sacred. Not because it's efficient, but because it reflects transcendence. Remember, we're talking biblically now. God as Father, right? Filial piety in Confucian ethics, covenant lineage in Islamic and in Jewish traditions. Family transmits moral language vertically through generations, generation after generation after generation, right? You learn from your ancestors. When that vertical transmission weakens, what steps into play? Right? So then moral authority becomes horizontal and politicized, contested, and unstable. And institutions can manage, they cannot sanctify. So that's important. That now our moral guidelines are institutionalized by policy, and it makes us unstable because it's constantly contested daily. Okay? So, is there some kind of sociological warning or moral reckoning that we can learn from this? So we're now 60 to 80 years into a structural experiment where marriage is delayed, and it's being delayed more and more. Like, people are getting married, for those that opt in, because there are a lot of people that are not opting into marriage anymore. But those people that are opting into marriage, they're getting married later and later and later in life. And birth outside covenant becomes normalized. So, birth outside of marriage. And because of those things, remember, statistics don't lie, incarceration is being expanded. It is. The prison system is expanding all of the time. That's extremely dangerous as well. Economic pressure is going to intensify because we have more people getting married out of wedlock into these single parent homes. Remember, who steps in? Who steps in to replace the absent father or the absent mother? It's the state. It's the government. Okay? Those institutions get their money from where? Us, the tax-paying people, right? That puts more economic pressure on society. And that's going to keep intensifying generation after generation after generation, as long as we keep having these single-parent homes. And because of that, state intervention is going to become scaled off of that. And the results are measurable. All of those things are measurable. You can measure all of those things statistically, okay? It's not emotional at all. It's measurable. And so this is not about nostalgia. It's about trajectory. Civilizations can survive corruption at the top for decades, and it has, right? It has. Look at the Epstein files, right? We've kind of hinted and known that some of this stuff was happening. We just didn't know as to what degree and severity some of these things are happening. But civilization has still moved forward. I mean, those things have been happening for years and years and years now, but civilization is still moving forward, right? So even though we have that corruption that is surviving at the very top of the pinnacle of the pyramid, civilization is still moving forward. And civilization is going to struggle to survive the erosion at the base. What is the base? The base of all civilization can be traced back to the family unit. Okay? Because when formation weakens, management has to grow. And management grows in the form of more programs, more agencies, more intervention, more oversight. Okay? That's going to come from government. Do we want more government? I would say no. We've just seen that government can't handle itself, that government can be corrupt. It can be corrupted across the board on both sides, everywhere. Do we want more corruption? Or do we take a step back and do we want something more stabilized? Because something must stabilize in stability. But stability through management is not the same as strength through formation. If we want to ask whether collapse is by design or drift, we must answer something harder. At what point does drift become a direction? At what point do incentives become architecture? If they're around long enough, right? But at what point does that happen? At what point does compensation become replacement? Are these institutions replacing the father figure? Are these institutions compensating and replacing the mother figure? In some instances, they are. It's already happening, and it's extremely dangerous. And if the family is the first moral classroom, then its erosion is not a private issue. It's a civilizational one. It is. Erosion is not a private issue. It's a civilizational one. When we're talking about the nuclear family, the formation of the family. Because systems do not raise children. They can try all they want, right? We can put policy after policy after policy into play, but it has shown us in the past that systems do not and cannot raise children. What raises children? People do. And if we want to talk about breaking the system, we might have to rebuild what came before it. Well, let's ask ourselves what came before it. Dinner tables, vows, covenant, responsibility, all of those things. Because without those, no amount of policy will ever reverse the fracture. Ever. And don't get me wrong, this isn't an outrage, although we should be outraged that this is happening. And I think today's society in America speaks for itself. When we lose the morals and values and the responsibility that the parents put in place in a nuclear family, what comes next? Right? So it's not an outrage. It's arithmetic. Because statistics don't lie. And arithmetic does not care about ideology. It doesn't care. Okay? So, think about those questions tonight. And I know there are a lot of people that don't really agree with the nuclear family. There are a lot of people that their morals and values change depending on, if you are 2 women in the household, 2 men in the household. I still think with those, it's still better. It's still far better than just having a single parent within the home. Okay? So don't take that as the wrong way. I still think as long as you have 2 parents within the household, it's going to help the children across the board. Okay? But statistically, when we're talking about the nuclear family, so having a mother and a father within the same home, numbers don't lie. The arithmetic don't lie. Okay? We have to start thinking about the future and the policies and the procedures that we're putting into law, into doctrine today. And is that making the United States stronger or weaker? And you can't lie to yourself. Look at society. Actually look at society. Is society better today than what it was 10 years ago? 20 years ago? 30 years ago? Is it? This is Breaking the System. You guys have a good day.